بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. صلى الله عليك يا سيدي ومولاي يا رسول الله. صلى الله عليك وعلى أهل بيتك المظلومين. صلى الله عليك يا أبا عبد الله، يا أبرة كل مؤمن ومؤمنة، يا غريب كربلاء. ما خاب والله من تمسك بكم، وأمن من لجأ إليكم. يا ليتنا كنا معكم فنفوز والله فوزا عظيما. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين، سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب قلوبنا وشفيع لذنوبنا وتبيب نفوسنا أبي القاسم محمد، والصلاة والسلام على أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين، ولعنة الله على أعدائهم أجمعين إلى قيام يوم الدين. وفقنا الله وإياكم بعلم وأمل صالح إن شاء الله، بذكر الصلاة على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم. أما بعد، فقد قال الله عز وجل في كتابه الكريم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. زين للناس حب الشهوات من النساء. زين للناس حب الشهوات من النساء والبنين والقناطير المقنطرة من الذهب والفضة. آمنا بالله. صدق الله العلي العظيم. Respected elders, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. The ayah of the Holy Quran is a very important ayah in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala begins to describe how He has created the human being, regardless of it being a male or a female. You find that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created each and every one of us to have certain elements that by default we are attracted to. So you find, for example, زُيِّنَ لِلنَّاسِ, we have made attractive for the human being حُبُّ الشَّهَوَاتِ, the love of their desires. The desires of, for example, relationships, the desires of eating and drinking, the desires of, for example, as the ayah goes on to say, مِنَ النِّسَاءِ, the desires of having a spouse, a woman, if it's a man, but a spouse in general, وَالْبَنِينَ, and children. Yes, that when a person, for example, has the desires of getting married, and this is something that all youths or majority of the youths go through, that when they become of age, they feel that it is time to take on more responsibilities. And naturally, this is what we all go through in our lives. The older we get, the more wiser we become. And the more wiser we become, the more knowledgeable we become. And we realize that with this knowledge, with this wisdom, with the ability to do many things in our lives, it is now time to take on more responsibilities. So a youth, for example, within the community will be ready to find a wife, to settle down, to find a job, to find a house. And then when he finds a wife and then they get married, that love that exists between them doesn't last for very long. That desires that's there in the beginning doesn't last for very long. You find when majority of the youths get married, they get married to have their desires satisfied. That's one of the reasons as to why youths ought to get married, in order for them to channel their desires that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created us with by default in the halal way, to channel it according to the dimensions of His Sharia. But you find that as this couple gets married, that desire, the fulfillment of that desire happens so quickly that you find that it doesn't last long before they decide to take on even more responsibilities, and that is to have children. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this ayah explains that one of the natural attraction of the human being is not just to have a spouse, but to also have children. And then he goes on to say, وَالْقَنَاطِيرِ الْمُقَنْطَرَةِ مِنَ الذَّهَبِ وَالْفِضَّةِ, and that mankind has this innate love to gather and to amass wealth from the gold and the silver. But that's not part of our discussion. What's part of our discussion is the idea of having children. And therefore, I want to break down this discussion into a number of different areas. Number one, what is the reality of having children? Or in general, what is the reality of children in the religion of Islam? Number two, what does Imam As-Sajjad, salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi, explain to us with regards to the responsibilities that we have with our children? Number three, what do the A'imma say about a righteous child? And number four, how can we train our children to be righteous in this world? So let's begin with the discussion. As we found, or as we saw in the ayah of the Holy Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala explains that having children is a natural order. Mankind, for example, naturally has been built to survive, to procreate. And by procreation, we love to have children. Many of us, for example, we are proud by the number of children that we have. Yes, you find that there are certain members in the community, they don't, for example, compare themselves with regards to the wealth they have. You have others in the community, for example, they compete with one another with regards to their fame, with regards to their wealth, with regards to, for example, their knowledge, with regards to the profits that they engage in their business. But there are some who compete with one another with regards to their children. Yes, you find, for example, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created the human being with this innate love for having children. وَأَمْدَدْنَا لَكُمْ بِأَمْوَالٍ وَبَنِينَ, and we gave you madad. We supported you, we helped you with what? بِأَمْوَالٍ وَبَنِينَ. Number one, with wealth, with mal, amwal. And number two, with baneen, with children. And so the idea behind this is that when you look towards the history of the Holy Quran, as well as the history just in general, you find that there are certain personalities amongst the messengers of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who were deprived of this blessing. There were those who, for example, were not able to have children, the likes of Nabi Ibrahim, the likes of Nabi Zakaria. They were very old when they were granted children. And you find the likes of Nabi Zakaria, for example, and Nabi Ibrahim, they used to beg Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant them a child. Until they reached an age, they were considered to be very old. The likes of Nabi Ibrahim, for example, he was 90 plus years of age before Ishaq and Ismail were given to him. Zakaria, they say that he was of roughly the same age as well. He was an elderly man. When he used to beg Allah, Ya Allah, فَحَبْ لِي مِن لَدُنْكَ وَلِيًّا, give me a child who will be supportive to you, who will support your religion, who will propagate your religion. Ya Allah, give me a child, يَرِثُنِي وَيَرِثُ مِنْ آلِ يَعْقُوبَ. Give me a child who will inherit me and will inherit the children of Yaqub alayhi salam, the family of Yaqub alayhi salam. Meaning what? Meaning that this is the reason why we love to have children. There are many things, for example, that we have established within our lives. There are many things, for example, that we have been successful in our businesses, in the academia world, for example, in many a times in the establishments of orphanages or madaris. We've done many things in our lives that we are proud of. Many skills that we have established within our lives which we want to pass on. And so we crave or we yearn to have children so that we can teach them what we have learned in our lives. This is a psychological love that a father or a mother has for their children. This is something absolutely beautiful that you will not find in any social circle within any community in the world. You find, for example, when you look at a father or a person in general. Take a person, for example. A person will compare himself to his cousins. He will compare himself to his brothers, his own blood brothers. At times, he will ask questions saying, well, hold on a second. My brother and I, we grew up together in the same household. We went to the same school. We got the same grades. We went to the same university. Yes, we did the same course in university. Why is it that he has far more success than I do? Why is it that he attracts wealth and I, for example, have to work hard and hard and hard to try and get an inch of that wealth that he has? So we tend to compare ourselves with other people. For example, our uncles or our aunts, or for example, our friends. We grew up together, we studied together. Yet I find that he is far more successful than I am. So what did I do wrong in my life for me to be held back, for my growth to stagnate, whereas his growth progressed? It's a fundamental question. But when you look at the relationship between a father and a son, the relationship between a father and a son is so special that the father, when he sees his son becoming far more successful than he is, you find that naturally the father will become proud. Yes, the father will have no jealousy whatsoever. The father will turn around and say, I am proud of my son. From the bottom, from the depths of his heart, he will see that he is proud of the achievements of his son. Likewise, you find, for example, there is no inch of jealousy in his heart. There is no envy in his heart. There is only iftikhar. There is only pride. There is only pride in his heart. And so, Nabi Zakaria highlights a very important point. He says, let my son, grant me a son, number one, and let him inherit from me. Whether he inherits, for example, a kingdom, whether he inherits wisdom from me, whether he inherits knowledge from me, it doesn't matter. All I want is that everything that I have gained in this world, I want to pass it on to him. Number one. Number two, you find, for example, there are certain personalities in the Holy Quran where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not grant them children at all. But they used to crave having children. The likes of whom, not only did they crave for children, but they opted to adopt a child in their lives. Like whom? You have two personalities. And when the Quran narrates their words, the Quran copy-pastes their words exactly in two different surahs. One is Asiya, the wife of Fir'aun, and the second is Al-Aziz, the king in the time of Nabi Yusuf alayhi salam. They say that when Yusuf came into their lives, or when Nabi Musa came into the life of Asiya, the wife of Fir'aun, they came forward and they said, Asa an yanfa'ana. This child, let's keep this child. Why? Perhaps it will bring us benefit in this world. Many of us, we have children. Why do we have children? Because we want the benefits of this world. Yes, we want to be happy. Happiness, for example, joy manifests itself as having children. Asa an yanfa'ana aw nattakhidahu walada. Or we should take him as a child of our own. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not grant them children, but Allah gives them the opportunity to adopt a child in their lives. And then you have, for example, certain personalities whom Allah gave them children, but those children were taken away from them as well. The likes of whom? The likes of the Holy Prophet of Islam, sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wasallam. The Holy Prophet, they say that he had a few sons that were born to him, but these sons, unfortunately, Allah chose in His decree to take them away from the Holy Prophet of Islam whilst they were young. The likes of Ibrahim, the likes of Qasim, for example, we read where in Surah Al-Kawthar, إِنَّا أَعْطَيْنَاكَ الْكَوْثَرَ. We have indeed given you Al-Kawthar. What was the revelation? The reason behind the revelation of this verse? It is because Rasulullah lost his son. Rasulullah was now in a state of grief. He wasn't a robot. As in, don't think that because the Holy Prophet was a prophet of Allah, someone who was connected with Alim al-Dunya and Alim al-Malakut, therefore he had no emotions the way we have emotions. No, he was a human being. Someone who grieved and someone who was sorrowful when his son was taken away from him. So when Ibrahim, or according to some narrations, Qasim was taken away by Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi from him, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reveals the verse and says, Ya Rasulullah, do not worry, indeed I will give you Al-Kawthar. One of the interpretations of the manifestations of Al-Kawthar is Az-Zahra salamullahi alayha sayyidat al-nisa al-alamin min al-awwaleen wal-akhirin. And so you find, for example, you had certain individuals who Sons were not given to them, or they were given to them and they were taken away from them as well, as a test, for example, adversity, as a tribulation in their lives. And then when you read the books of history, you find, for example, the likes of Shahid al-Thani, the likes of Sheikh Zainuddin al-Shahid al-Thani. What was so remarkable of this great scholar of ours? Al-Shahid al-Thani, he is one of the bright stars of our madhab. May Allah raise his maqam in the hereafter, inshallah. They say as long as he was alive, he had many children, many sons. According to some narrations, 7, 8 sons. These 7, 8 sons, they were born to him, but they were taken away from him as well. When they were young, each and every one of them passed away. Ash-Shaheed al-Thani, he goes through adversities that many of us, for example, would never think of going. May Allah protect us from such an adversity where we have to witness the taking of our children away from us. Shaheed al-Thani, Allah takes his sons one after another, and they say that he sat down and he began authoring a book. He authors a book where he talks about how to deal with the loss of a child. This book is, alhamdulillah, it's available online. It's available and it's been translated in English for those who have lost their children. It is a beautiful book to return to and see how our great scholars used to behave, how they used to deal, how they moved on and how they recovered from such a great loss. What did they do in their lives that allowed them to become stronger in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? So you find Shahid al-Thani, for example, he was someone who lost many children, but then they say that one child, his final son, was given to him. And when it was given to him, unfortunately, he was martyred. He was executed before his child grew up, before his child reached the ages of bulugh. Therefore, when you come back to the topic at hand, you realize that having children, having a lineage, is a ni'mah from the ni'mat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It is one of the most clear blessings that a person can have. It is a desire that we have within our hearts to have children. But then you find that when children are given, we have a responsibility. Before moving on to that area, you look at, for example, the life of the Holy Prophet of Islam. The Holy Prophet of Islam, yes, Sahih, he did not have children. He did not have sons, but he had grandsons. Yes, Imam Hassan and Imam al-Hussein, Sayyidi Shababi Ahl al-Jannah, salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhima. They say that the Prophet used to play with them. The Prophet used to, for example, spend a lot of his time with them. When he would recite Salat al-Jama'ah and Abu Abdullah alayhi salam would sit on his back, he would nurture him, he would care for him. They would come and say to him, Ya Rasulullah, why did you stretch your sujood? He said, because Abu Abdullah was sitting on my neck. He was sitting on my back and I did not want to move from that position, such that he would be hurt if I moved from that position. That's how much respect he had for the Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam, for his two grandsons. He played with them and he was proud of them. And so therefore, according to the Islamic thought, you realize that when a person has children, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has granted you a lineage, whether it be of just one person, whether it be 10 children, for example, each and every one of us now has a responsibility. A responsibility is given to us whenever, and this is an Islamic principle, whenever for example, a bounty has been given to us, whenever a ni'mah has been given to us, we have a responsibility to carry out and to interact with this ni'mah the way Allah wants me to interact with this ni'mah, not the way I want to interact with my ni'mah. You take the example of wealth. When Allah grants you wealth, then you have a responsibility. You have a responsibility to share that wealth with the others. You have a responsibility, for example, not to use that wealth when it comes to buying and selling things which are haram. Or, for example, neglecting to pay khums or zakat because somehow you feel that this wealth belongs to you. No, it is a bounty of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He has given you. And because Allah has given you this ni'mah, you have a responsibility towards it. That is absolutely fundamental and crucial. And likewise, when a child is given, we have a responsibility towards that child. It's not that we just sit back on our sofas and we chill on Netflix. We watch one program after another, binge. In the mornings, we go to work, we come home, we spend about half an hour with our children, and that's it, job done. No. Allah has given us children. We have a responsibility to spend time with them, to engage in their upbringing. Look at the words of Imam Sajjad alayhi salam, الرسالة الحقوق, when he talks about the right of your child, the rights of our child or children. It says, وَأَمَّا حَقُّ وَلَدِكَ, and as for the right of your child, فَأَن تَعْلَمَ أَنَّهُ مِنْكَ, it is that you know that he is from you. وَمُضَافٌ إِلَيْكَ, and he is ascribed to you. This is a fundamental word that the Imam alayhi salam says. وَمُضَافٌ إِلَيْكَ, وَمُضَافٌ إِلَيْكَ, he is ascribed to you. فِي عَاجِلِ الدُّنْيَا بِخَيْرِهِ وَشَرِّهِ, whatever he does in this world, from the good to the bad, it will be ascribed back to you. Because you are the father, because you are the mother, whatever your son or your daughter does in this world, in this dunya, it will come back to you. And this is how we are in our communities. This is our identity in our communities. The people in the community, when they see my son, they see me. We are judged, not consciously, but subconsciously by and through our children. Many years ago, people used to see our fathers by seeing us. They would see me and then they would attribute me to my father. Today, they see your son and they judge you by seeing your son. This is how identities are within our communities. Let me give you an example. You take the example of a scholar, a profound scholar in a particular community. Now, this scholar, he created a community. He looked after the community. He gave knowledge to the people of the community. He taught the children Quran. He taught the children how to, for example, commemorate the shahadat and how to celebrate the wiladat. He was a pivotal person within that community. You find that when the scholar passes away, he leaves behind sons. There are sons, 2, 3, 4, 5 sons, doesn't matter. You find that the people in the community, whenever they see the sons, they are reminded of the father. When they see the son, for example, going towards the house, whether it be Najaf or Qom or anywhere else, and then he comes back as a scholar, serving the community, you'll find people will come up to them, especially amongst the elders, and they will be happy from the depths of their heart. They will say, Wallah, your father was a good man, a scholar, and we are proud to see you following his footsteps. Whenever we see you, you remind us of your father. Yes, that connection has been established. Then you find, for example, very beautifully, if one of the sons goes in the other direction, yes, it becomes a gambler, it becomes an alcoholic, he, for example, loses track of his life and the responsibilities of his life, he becomes munharif in every sense of the word. You find the people are hurt from within. My God, your father was such a great man. Your father was such a great personality. Your father was an alim from amongst the ulama. And look what you've done. You've not followed the footsteps of your father. You've gone the opposite direction. The people feel hurt. Why? Because when they see the son ruining the reputation of their great father, they are in the state, they are grieved by it. And so naturally, what happens is, people within our communities, each and every one of us on a subconscious level, we judge others based on their children. Yes, this is something that we need to bear in mind. You find, for example, this definitely took place in the city of Medina. Imam al-Hassan as well as Imam al-Hussein salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhima, whenever the people of Medina would see them, they would automatically be reminded of Rasulullah. They would come and they would interact with the Imams, and then they would constantly be reminded of Rasulullah. And so therefore, the ayah of the Holy Quran comes forward and gives us 2 verses. Now it means that these 2 verses, from the apparent nature of it, it may seem that these 2 verses are contradicting one another. But it's not contradicting. What does the verse say? One verse says, المال والبنون زينة الحياة الدنيا. That wealth and children, a lineage, they are the beauties of dunya. Yes? But then the other verse, what does it say? It says, وَاعْلَمُوا أَنَّمَا أَمْوَالَكُمْ وَأَوْلَادَكُمْ فِتْنَةٌ. Understand that indeed, most definitely, your wealth and your children are seen as fitna for you. Well, hold on a second. How can my wealth and my children be a fitna? Our discussion is about children. How can my children be a fitna when the other verse tells me that the beauties of this world are my children? It's depending on how we raise our children, how much we invest in their tarbiyah. That is the key behind understanding the message behind the Holy Quran. When you use this verse of Imam al-Sajjad alayhi salam, the hadith of him, he says that everything that your child does in this world, from the good to the bad, it all comes back to you. If you teach your children how to do good, and they establish their character by that good, it will come back to you. Your life will now become zinat al-hayat. It will become the most attractive of worlds. But then, if you teach your child bad, if you teach your child that there is nothing wrong in engaging in evil, and they go ahead and they characterize themselves with that evil, whenever they perform that evil, what happens? It comes back to us as parents. Then you find that the effects of their actions is that they will make our lives a fitna. That's why Allah says your wealth and your banun are seen as fitna, or your awlad are seen as fitna. And that's why the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam have constantly come forward and they have emphasized the importance of raising righteous children. You find, for example, raising righteous children is truly what builds a strong community. And in the views of the Sharia, we all have a responsibility in raising our children according to the message of the Ahlul Bayt, giving them godly values that they establish their lives with. You find, for example, one narration in particular, it says, وَلَدٌ صَالِحٌ رَيْحَانَةٌ مِّن رَيَاحِينَ الْجَنَّةِ. That having a righteous child is seen as a fragrance from the fragrances of heaven. In Surah Al-Waqi'ah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about this, doesn't he? When he talks about the worldly or the heavenly pleasures, one of them is scent. Scent, fundamental within our societies. Smell, it's $1 billion industry in this day and age. Yes, you have all of these different colognes and perfumes, each and every one of them trying to have a market share. You find that when you smell something which is nice, something which is good, it helps you, it calms you, it controls your emotions in one way or another. If you're feeling, for example, in a particular mood, you want to smell something and that enhances that mood. If you're for example, feeling a bit down and you want to help yourself become a bit more lively, then you put on a few sprays of perfume, and that helps you move on. And that helps you tremendously control your emotions. When you smell something pungent, when something absolutely disgusting, like for example trash or something rotten, what does it do? It makes you feel uncomfortable. Immediately it makes you feel uncomfortable. And so you find that from this area, scent is seen as an idea, a concept, an element that either brings about peace and comfort or something that brings about discomfort and something that upsets you. Here the Ahlul Bayt come forward and they say having a righteous child gives you security, it gives you peace, because they are seen as a beautiful fragrance, a fragrance of Jannah, and not the fragrances of this world. In a second narration, for example, إِذَا مَاتَ ابْنَ آدَمَ انْقَطَعَ عَمَلُهُ إِلَّا مِنْ ثَلَاثَ. That when Ibn Adam leaves this world, 3 things are cut from him. Which 3 things? Number 1, 3 things are, everything is cut from him except for 3 things. Which 3 things? Number 1, amalun, sadaqatul jariyah. When a person gives sadaqah, when a person comes into our centers and says, we are now building an orphanage or we are building a masjid, we hasten in giving sadaqah. Why? Because I know that the fruits of this sadaqah, even when I leave this world and I go 6 feet down, the rewards will still come into my grave. Yes? Number one, sadaqatul jariyah, al-ilm yuntafa'u bih. When I gain knowledge that I benefit from, or knowledge that I gain that others benefit from. Yes? And number three, waladun salih yad'u lah. When a righteous child prays for his parents. That is absolutely fundamental. You look at the world today, there are those who ran after the world. They amassed great wealth. They worked day in, day out. They made sure that they are workaholics. They came forward and they justified their actions by saying what? They said, look, first and foremost, I want to work hard and I want to make sure that my children are looked after, that they are raised in an environment different to how I was raised. I was raised, for example, in the harshest of ways. I was raised in poverty. I don't want that for my children. So I work day in and day out, to make sure that they are looked after. We say, Sahih, may Allah reward you for your kind intentions and your sincere intentions. But you have to understand sometimes, where are your priorities? Are you justifying your workaholic tendencies because you want to raise your children in a good environment? You don't need wealth to raise your children in a good environment. You need to spend time with them. You need to sit down with them. You need to play with them. You need to teach them. You need to speak with them. Because you find those who amassed great wealth only to leave it behind for their sons to inherit, those sons do not remember their parents. Nor do they go, for example, to the Qabristan, to the cemeteries to pray Fatiha for their loved parents. Nor do they organize niyaz for their parents. Nor do they organize majalis for their parents. Yes? When the parent leaves, he leaves behind his wealth only for the sons and the daughters to inherit and move on with their lives without their parents ever being remembered. So you have to understand. You have to constantly try and understand that there is priorities. We have many priorities in our lives. They say one day, for example, Nabi Isa alayhi salam was walking past the grave. And when he passed the grave, Isa alayhi salam saw the effects of punishments coming from that particular grave. He saw within the grave and he saw the person being punished left, right and center. After a year, after a sana, they say he came back to the same grave. He was walking past the same grave. He was walking past and he saw that there was no fire. لا نار في بل هو روضة من رياض الجنة. It was seen as a garden from the gardens of paradise. تعجب عيسى. He was shocked. And he called out, وَنَادَ رَبُّهُ كَيْفَ تُغَيِّرُ الْأَمْرُ مِنْ تِلْكَ السَّنَةِ إِلَى هَذِهِ السَّنَةِ. He says, what happened from that year, from last year until today? What changed in a span of a year? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِنَّهُ أَدْرَكَ وَلَدًا صَالِحًا يَتَصَدَّقْ عَنْهُ وَيَسْتَغْفِرْ لَهُ فَغَفَرَ اللَّهُ لَهُ. What a beautiful hadith. He says that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala responds. He says within that year, that child that he had grew up, and that child constantly gives sadaqah on behalf of his father. And he seeks forgiveness for his father, on behalf of his father. And therefore I, as the Lord, فَغَفَرَ اللَّهُ لَهُ, Allah forgived him. This is the power of having righteous children. And so therefore, when the question is raised, how do I raise righteous children? What methods do I establish within my life? There are many. Amongst them, for example, be okay to spend from your wealth for your children. Many of us, it's hard for us to, for example, spend the pounds and the dollars for our children's upbringing. Spend. Don't worry about your money. Allah will give it back to you in ways that you would never imagine. Whether it's by raising a righteous child, or, for example, Allah will return that wealth to you. Invest in your children. Yes? Rather than, for example, focusing on buying them gadgets here and there, buy them something that they can learn from. Yes, take them out to the farms, take them out to certain parks, spend some of your wealth in raising your children appropriately. Number two, teach them adab. This goes back to the advice of Imam Sadiq, Imam Sajjad alayhi salam. He says, teach them adab, teach them etiquettes. Which type of etiquettes? Which type of adab? Which type of customs? The adab of eating, for example. Make sure that when they sit on the table, they don't stare at the members of the family eating their food. Make sure that they start with the basmala. Make sure, for example, they thank Allah after they finish eating. Make sure that they thank the one who has cooked the meal after eating, whether it's the mother or the father. Yes? Make sure, for example, the adab of hadith, the adab of them speaking with one another. وَقُولُوا لِلنَّاسِ husna. Teach them how to communicate with one another. That's crucial and vital. To not use vulgar language, for example. Children learn from us. If the husband and the wife, the mother and the father are using vulgar language between themselves, they're constantly cursing and insulting each other, they're using vile words, the child picks this up. And the worst thing is that the child believes that this is normal, such that when they go to universities or when they go to school and they engage with others in the community, they use the same style of language that is used in the house, only to be reprimanded by the people of the community, because they come to realize that no, it's not normal. There was a beautiful question that was raised online in one of the forums on social media, and the question was a public question. They said, when did you know that your family were different from all the other families in the society? And one woman stood out and she said, I realized that my family were different when I was invited by my boyfriend's family for dinner. I went to their house, I sat down, and I could not imagine how they used to speak with one another. They spoke with one another with respect. They spoke with one another with kind words. Then that day I realized how wrong my family were, how rubbish my family were, because never have I been taught to speak in such a way. So you find teaching your children the adab of hadith is also very significant. How to speak with the elders, how to speak with the children, all of that is our responsibility. Number two, to teach them aqaid. Yes, it's not the madrasa's responsibility to teach my son aqidah. It's my responsibility. Luqman says to his son, he says, Ya bunayya la tushrik billah. Your first advice, my advice to you, or my son, is that you do not perform shirk, that you establish tawheed in your life. It's not the madrasa's responsibility, it's my responsibility. No one's asking you to become a philosopher for you to be able to teach tawheed, for example, to your son. But the basics of it should be within your hearts and your minds. And then when your sons grow up slowly, when they become age of mature, you sit down with them and you teach them the tenets of aqaid. Yes, teach them about the Ahlul Bayt and the characteristics of the Ahlul Bayt. How, for example, Imam Hussein alayhi salam struggled during these days and these nights. The children of Abu Abdullah alayhi salam, teach them these values at whatever capacity they can understand. Yes, no one's, for example, telling you to know the inner depths and dimensions of Karbala. Learn the basics of Karbala. Sit down and teach your children the vital message of Karbala. Otherwise, if you do not step in and teach your children these valuable assets and these valuable pieces of knowledge, the schooling system, the state, the government, they will all step in and they will feed your child information. It's a race at the end of the day. We need to get to our children first before society does. And if society gets and corrupts their minds, it will be very difficult to undo that. So we need to make it a responsibility. Number three, to teach them good akhlaq, practical akhlaq, how to walk behind the father, for example, to give sadaqah. Yes, many of us, for example, we should give our children money so that they can go put it in the boxes. Yes, if you're giving sadaqah physically, this teaches them practical establishments of akhlaq, to be grateful for what they have, and so on and so forth. Number four, to always monitor the friends that they keep. That is absolutely crucial. Friends impact our characteristics and our identities. If I have, for example, friends who are away from the religion of Islam, naturally I will move away from the religion of Islam. If I have friends who are in love with the Ahlul Bayt, then you will find that I, as an individual, will naturally love the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. Lucky are those who have good friends, strong friends, who come to the center as a group to listen to the majalis, to even socialize within the masajids and the Husayniyah, because they know that this will bring them closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When you read the stories of the ulama, you see that the ulamas, one of the things that they were grateful for was the peer and the colleagues, was the study buddies that they used to have, the friends that they used to keep. Number five, to nurture their minds and to teach them how to think. That's our responsibility as well. To not just overload them with information. Unfortunately, you find that in many a times, a father or a mother is only caring to help their children get, for example, the best of grades, to, for example, establish the highest of grades in the schooling system. This is not what tarbiyah is. As in, for example, when you look at the whole picture of life, what you get, what your sons and your daughters get in GCSEs and A-levels and universities, this is just a grain of sand compared to what life has to offer. To overload your children with information is not the right method of raising children. Yes, teaching them the ability to think is what is far more profound. Even when a person does not have, for example, the respected qualifications. Qualifications is important. I'm not saying it's not important, but what's far more important is to teach your children how to think and how to make decisions in their lives, how to see right from wrong. What are, for example, the standards of right and wrong? What are the barometers of right and wrong? Teaching them how to decide, teaching them how to make sound decisions in their life, for example. Some of us, for example, we lack this in our youthful days. But this is a chance for us to step up to the game and to teach our children all of these different ideas and values and elements so that they become better than us. Because ideally, as parents, we all wish for our children to become far greater and far better than us. We raise them in a way that we make sure that they do not make the same mistakes that we made. When you take your minds, for example, to Karbala, you find that the sons that were there, that gave their lives for Abu Abdullah alayhi salam, they did so because of strong tarbiyah. It was the sons of Muslim ibn Aqil, for example. Muslim ibn Aqil, they say 2 of his sons were slaughtered in Kufa. And there were 2 sons who were slaughtered in Karbala alongside Abu Abdullah. Turn your minds towards those 2 sons in Kufa. According to narrations, one by the name of Muhammad and Ibrahim, or the other, according to other narrations, it was Muhammad and Ja'far. Regardless of their names, some narrations say that they were 10 and 8 years of age, some say that they were 5 and 3. These were babies, these were children of Muslim ibn Aqil. They say, very interesting, when Harith al-Hamadani knew that his children, Muslim ibn Aqil's children, are resting in his home, he takes a rope and he ties them and he takes them towards the place where he is slaughtering them. He takes them to this place. He unsheathes his sword. He comes towards these 2 children. And then with such audacity, he says, "Who should I strike first?" He asks this question to the children. The discussion that takes place between these 2 boys and Harith al-Hamadani needs to be highlighted because Muslim ibn Aqil didn't just overload them with information. He taught them how to think. He taught them how to speak. He taught them how to make decisions in their lives. They say the 2 boys turn to Harith al-Hamadani. He says, "Ya Harith, have mercy on us. We are from the household of the Prophet. You show mercy on us now. Allah will show mercy on you on the day of judgment." Imagine, this is coming from this is the language of a 10-year-old and an 8-year-old, or even a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old. That their vision is not based on dunya. Their vision goes beyond the dunya towards the akhirah. Ya Harith, look at your akhirah, don't look at your dunya. Ya Harith, if you want mal from Ibn Ziyad, then take us to Ibn Ziyad. Do not kill us. Beautifully, they say to him, take us to Ibn Ziyad alive. Do not slaughter us. Because if you don't kill us, Allah will safeguard you on the day of judgment. Harith rejects this completely. He says, no. The order is that you have to be beheaded and I will behead you. He says, Harith, if you want mal from Ibn Ziyad, then sell us in the slave market. Sell us as slaves. Free yourself from the torments of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. At least you will gain some money. Harith replies, he says, no, it is not money that I am yearning for from Ibn Ziyad. It is taqarrub, the proximity that I will have with Ibn Ziyad. He comes forward and he says, who should I strike first? The elder son stands up and he says, strike me first, because my younger brother does not understand the harara, the heat of the blade. The younger brother stands up and he says, la, 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 strike me first, because I cannot bear to see my older brother struck and slaughtered before me. Harith, he strikes one of the sons. They say that the other son of Muslim ibn Aqil, when he sees his brother has just been struck, he begs Harith. He says, Harith, give me a moment. He says, what should I give you a moment for? He says, let me just straighten his body. Let me just, close the wound a little bit. Let me, change his body in a more respectable way. Let me stand the way he was standing, out of respect for him. And as soon as the child moves a little, Harith immediately strikes the younger son. When you turn your minds towards Karbala, you have, for example, the other two sons of Muslim. You have, for example, Qasim and Abdullah, the sons of Imam al-Hassan. Then you have, for example, Aliyun al-Akbar. And then Aliyun al-Asghar. Aliyun al-Akbar, the son of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, when he goes towards the battlefield, when he goes towards the fight, he says, Ana Ali ibn al-Hussein ibn Ali. Nahnu wa bayt Allah awla bin Nabi. He identifies himself. He says, we are indeed from the bayt of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We are from the household of the Prophet. And we are more greater and more closer to the Prophet than any of you. This was a child, this was a son of Imam alayhi salam, 20 years of age, according to majority of the historians. They say that when he approaches the battlefield, he identifies himself in such a way. At'ankum birramhi hatta yanthani. I will strike you with my spear and I will kill you. Adribkum bis-sayf. Ahmi ana abi. And I will strike you with my sword and I will protect my father. Darbu ghalamin. Hashimi and Alawi, I will strike you the strike of a Hashimi and a Alawi. Wallahi o tallahi la yahkum fina ibn al-da'i. This son of an adulterer, the son of an adulterer will never judge over us, will never show authority over us. Referring to Ibn Ziyad. They say that Imam alayhi salam allows Aliyun al-Akbar to go towards the battle. Aliyun al-Akbar, he comes and he fights and he bravely kills 120 from the opposition. But then the thirst begins to kill him, so he comes back to Abu Abdullah alayhi salam. When he comes back to Abu Abdullah alayhi salam, he says, Al-Atash, Al-Atash ya abata. العطش قد قتلني وثقل الحديد قد أجهدني. He says, my father, the thirst is killing me. The thirst is killing me. It's heavy on me. He says, the iron that I am wearing is heavy on me. Abu Abdullah alayhi salam, they say that when Aliyun al-Akbar was fighting, Layla, the mother of Akbar, she did not see her son fight. She would see the face of Abu Abdullah alayhi salam. When the head of Abu Abdullah, when the face of Abu Abdullah alayhi salam, When the expressions of Abu Abdullah alayhi salam changed from one way to another, Layla saw this as a signal. If she saw smiles in the face of Abu Abdullah, she would know that her son was doing well. But if she saw that the Imam alayhi salam had become grieved or saddened, then she would know that Ali al-Akbar was in trouble. She said, "My husband, Ya Abu Abdullah, tell me, how is my Ali doing in the battlefield?" Abu Abdullah says to her, "O Layla, do you not know that the mother, when she supplicates, the du'as of the mother is indeed answered by Allah?" Then she begins to recite and she lifts her hands and she says, "Ya Allah, the way you returned Yusuf to Yaqub, the way you returned Ismail to his mother, return my Ali to me." Ali al-Akbar, he comes back to Abu Abdullah alayhi salam, then he mentions these words, "The thirst is killing me, the iron is heavy on me." Abu Abdullah says to him, "Oh my son, go to your mother is waiting for you." He enters the tent of his mother, and then she turns to Allah, she says, "Ya Allah, it is as if I can smell the fragrance of my son Ali." Then Ali al-Akbar, he replies, he says, "My mother, it is me, I have returned." They embrace one another. Ali ibn al-Akbar then goes back to the battlefield and he cries and he fights the second time and he kills 200 from amongst the enemies. Hamid ibn Muslim, he narrates, he says, "I was standing next to a man by the name of Murra ibn Munkad al-Tamimi. Murra comes forward and he cries out, he says, 'May Allah place the sins of the Arabs on my shoulders. If I do not strike this youth, I will strike him with a strike so severe that will bring sorrow to the face of his father.'" They say that when Murra came on to Ali, he came from behind Ali and Ali did not know. He pierced the spear in the back of Ali. Then he lifts his sword and he strikes the head of Ali al-Akbar. Rahimallah man nada wa sayyidah. Aywa Husayna. They say, the narrations explain that Ali al-Akbar then falls on the head of his horse and he's clinging onto the neck of his horse. The horse loses control and the horse begins to move from one direction to another. The narrations explain that the horse cannot see and it goes towards the camps of the enemies. The horse does not return and cannot return to the tents of Abu Abdullah. When Ali al-Akbar enters the ranks of the enemies, وَقَتَعُوهُ بِسُيُوفِهِمْ رَبًّا رَبًّا, they began cutting him into pieces. Then he falls onto the ground and he calls out, "Ya Abu Abdullah, عليك من السلام أدركني أدركني." Sukaina narrates, she says that when the cries of my brother Ali al-Akbar reached my father Abu Abdullah, I saw my father mount his horse and he was facing the other direction and going towards that direction. I called out to my father, I said, "My father, the voice of my brother is coming from this direction. Why is it that you are heading towards that direction?" Abu Abdullah says, "Ya Sukaina, my daughter, do not blame me, I cannot see with my eyes." He says, "The death of Ali al-Akbar, the heat of Karbala, the heat of Karbala has blinded me." Then he heads towards Ali al-Akbar. When he comes towards Ali al-Akbar, he sits alongside him. He says, "My son, you smiling and you are crying. Why is it that you are smiling and why is it that you are crying?" He says, "My father, I smile because when I turn to this direction, I see my father, my grandfather Rasulullah. My grandfather Rasulullah is coming towards me. In his hands there is a cup of water from the ponds of Kawthar. He says, why do you cry, my son? He says, when I turn my head in this direction, I see my grandmother Zahra. I see my grandmother Fatima Zahra. She is looking at my wounds, and now she is looking towards your face, and whenever a tear comes from your eyes, she strikes her face and she strikes her cheeks, and she's crying and wailing, Wa Husayna. إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون سيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون. If we can recite Surah Al-Fatiha for all our marhumin, inshallah, Surah Al-Mubarak Al-Fatiha.